Hiya, my name is Jess and welcome to my channel, Have a Book at This. Today I'm going to be doing for you my February 2016 wrap-up video. So in the month of February this year I read 6 books, well I read 5 books and 1 play, and all of them were absolutely amazing and I cannot wait to talk about them with you. So the first book I read this month was All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This book is a World War II historical fiction novel and it follows sort of 2 main characters in their journeys. It follows a French girl called Marie-Laure who is blind, and it follows a young German boy called Werner who gets enrolled in the Hitler Youth and goes to one of the elite schools. So it's 2 very different characters going down 2 very different paths, and it essentially just follows their life during the war and what happens to them and how it affects and shapes their lives and the lives of those around them. This book was absolutely stunning. The prose was gorgeous. I'd never read anything by Anthony Doerr before, but I fully intend to after this. Reading his writing makes me understand how people can describe books as like delicious, because before I never understood how someone could describe a book as delicious or like, you know, I wanted to devour it. I never understood that, but reading this I literally wanted to eat the words because they were so beautiful and so vivid. Like every single sentence painted a picture so fully in my mind. I thought that the characters were excellent, particularly Marie-Laure. He crafted such a complex and wonderful character in her, and because this story covers like a time span of several years, from when Marie-Laure's like a very young child to sort of a young woman, it was really wonderful to see her character development in that way. I thought the 2 settings were also really interesting. So you have kind of like a French coast, so somewhere very picturesque, somewhere very beautiful, and then you have a very industrial city in Germany, and I thought that he managed to develop these 2 settings really, really well. I have very little to complain about for this book. All I can really think of is that some bits of it were quite slow paced, and there were times when I found the book quite easy to put down because there were bits that lulled a little, and also I felt that Werner, who's one of our other 2 main characters, was much less developed than Marie-Laure, and I just felt like I understood and knew his character less than I knew her character by the end of the book. Overall though, this was absolutely stunning. It deserves every ounce of hype that it gets, and I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars, and I intend to read a lot more by this author in the future. The next book I picked up this month was Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. It follows a young woman called Lou Clark, and after she loses her job at a cafe, she goes on this sort of desperate hunt for any form of work she can find, and she ends up working for a carer who a man called Will, who right at the beginning of this book we find out was in a very bad motorcycle accident that left him as a quadriplegic, so he can't move either of his legs. He has very little control over his body, his head, minimal movement in his arms and hands. So it follows their relationship, which is extremely complex, especially after Louisa learns that Will actually doesn't want to live and that his final wish is to be taken to Dignitas, where he can, you know, die with dignity, as is the phrase. He wants to be euthanized. First of all, let me just say that I picked up this book after All the Light We Cannot See, which is quite a harrowing, you know, heavy read, thinking, oh, you know, this cover, it looks nice, it looks like it'd be a light bit of chick lit, there's a film coming out soon, you know, I bet I can just read this and have some fun. Yeah, I was wrong. It wasn't light. This was not a light read. It was an amazing read. I thought that Lou was a really endearing narrator. I loved reading about her crazy sense of fashion, and her sense of humour was really dry and fun. Her interactions with Will were also really excellent. The relationship they developed was really good. So this book has a first-person perspective, but occasionally it will flip to other characters so you can sort of see into their heads, and that's also in first person. And I thought that was really interesting because you get to see a variety of perspectives within this book. You get to see perspective of Will's family, so his mother, Lou's family, of her sister, and it was just really interesting because I got to see how so many different people lives have been affected by Will's accident, and obviously by the decision that he keeps trying to make because he does not want to live. I thought it was really well handled, this topic in the book, the topic of euthanasia, of dying with dignity, of whether it should be allowed or whether it shouldn't be allowed, and I don't want to spoil what eventually happens in this book, but I just think that Jojo Moyes handled the subject without being preachy, without being cliche, and I respected that and I loved it. Some characters did feel a little bit unnecessary, so Lou's boyfriend in the book, Patrick, I couldn't really see what his function or point in the story was, but overall I thought that it was a really excellent book, and I'm definitely going to go and see the film when it comes out. It has the one who plays Daenerys in Game of Thrones in it, which is just amazing because I love her, and it also has the guy that plays Neville Longbottom in it, and I will see anything with him in it. Overall I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars and I would fully recommend it. The next book I read was Persuasion by Jane Austen. So I've been trying to read more classics, and a few years ago I read Pride and Prejudice and adored it. So this book follows a woman named Anne, and 8 years prior to the start of the novel she turned down a proposal from a young captain because basically her family thought that he wasn't rich enough for her, that he didn't have a high enough status. So when this book begins, Anne is still unmarried. She's never quite recovered from what she did in rejecting the proposal of this man, and then suddenly he returns into her life. Captain Wentworth returns into her life. He's now rich, he's still single, and Anne just kind of has to deal with consequences of her rejection of him all those years ago. I think what I really enjoy about Jane Austen's writing is like the wit of it. There's just something so kind of sarcastic in the way that she writes her characters and in her social commentary, and I really appreciated that, and I just think it's extremely ahead of its time. I was so surprised when I looked up the actual year it was released. I can't remember the exact date now, but I remember thinking, really? You know, she was writing female characters like that and things like that then? Romance in it was a really slow burner and I absolutely loved it. I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time. The sexual tension was just, you know, you could feel it in every page, and it was so intense, and the characters were absolutely wonderful. I really loved Anne. I just admired her kind of like her grit and her, I don't know, I just admired her so much. Overall, I didn't enjoy this book quite as much as I did Pride and Prejudice, which I just think is like that quintessential love story, but I did really, really enjoy it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, in February, I read a play, which isn't something I do that often, but it's something I've been looking to do more often, and the play I read was Rabbit Hole by David Lindsay-Abaire. So this play focuses on a married couple, Becca and Howie Corbett, and prior to the start of this play, their young son, Danny, I can't remember his exact age, maybe 4 or 5 years old, was hit and killed by a teenage driver. And this play sort of focuses on their kind of grief process, the way that they heal. So I'm performing a monologue from this play in college, which is why I chose to read it, and I was so grateful that I made that decision because it was so wonderful. Often with plays I find it quite hard when reading the play to kind of connect with the characters and to really have a clear idea of who they are in my head, but I did not have that issue with this play. I felt that every character was so well drawn and their speech was so convincing. It is not a sentimental portrayal of grief, I don't think. It just felt very real and raw. This was a really great experience for me because, like I said, I don't read that many plays, but after reading and loving this one, I definitely think I will, and I ended up giving this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read a book that as of now I don't have a physical copy of because I lent it to my mum to read because I liked it that much, and that was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. This incident of the dog in the nighttime follows a young boy with Asperger's syndrome called Christopher, who, after discovering his neighbour's dog killed in her front garden, decides to go on a detective mission to find out who killed the dog and why it happened. So like I said, the narrator has Asperger's syndrome, and Asperger's syndrome is something that I have personal experience with. I have someone in my family who has the condition, and it was just unbelievably interesting to see inside the mind that Mark Haddon constructed in the form of this character. It was a very disassociating read, is how I think I would describe it. It really plays with the way that you think and the way that you think other people think. Christopher's narration made the story, I think. His quirks were so interesting, things like he has an obsession with maths and numbers, so rather than the chapters being numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, they're numbered as the prime numbers. The story itself was just very unpretentious and simple, and I felt like it was just a very convincing portrayal of just everyday family life. The adults in this book were very well drawn, Christopher's father in particular, I felt, because he was flawed. You know, he wasn't a perfect parent, but I understood and I sympathised with him, and I absolutely adored his relationship with Christopher and how it played out. It was a very emotionally affecting read for me, and I don't think that was just because of my personal connection with the subject, because I think loads of people must have a personal connection with the subject because Asperger's is so common. I think it's 1 in 10 boys have it. but I just think that the way that Mark Haddon wrote was so evocative, and I adored it, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the final book I read this month was 1,000 Splendid Suns by, I'm going to butcher this name now, Khaled Hosseini. This book is set in Afghanistan, mainly during the period of time in which the Taliban ruled, and it follows 2 women from different generations. It follows Mariam, who was an illegitimate child of a very rich man and one of his house workers, and it follows Layla, who is a young woman who grew up in Kabul, and essentially explores women and their lives and their experiences during this really harsh rule of the Taliban, and the way that their lives intertwine and how they affect each other and how they change each other ultimately. Khaled Hosseini's writing is absolutely stunning. It's the way that he wrote it felt kind of like a tale is how I describe it. It felt like someone was telling like a bedtime story to me, like an old wives' tale. It was really, really amazing. The 2 main characters in this book, they had such distinct voices, Mariam and Layla, and I loved hearing their stories. They were so interesting and culturally rich. I've never read a book set in Afghanistan before, and this book was just really culturally vivid and so absorbing. It's made me want to read more books set in that area, just because I found it extremely interesting to read about a book that wasn't set in like England or America or Australia, but somewhere completely different that I've never been. It was a very moving book. I felt physically moved a lot of the time, almost to tears, and it was beautiful. I would love to read some more of his works in the future, and I also ended up giving this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. A lot of 4.5 out of 5 stars this month. So anyway, those were all the books and play that I read in February. I loved all of them, so let's hope that I have just as good a reading month in March. What books did you read in February? Have you enjoyed the books that you've read in February? Did the fact that it's a leap year allow you to get even more books into February? Let me know and leave a comment below, but until then, thank you for watching. Goodbye.